like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, whose lands on which we stand at the moment. And I want to recall, of course, what happened here on this land where we are today. 48 years ago today, on this land, one of the most iconic bridges in Australia collapsed, and strewn amongst the rubble, 35 workers lay dead. 30 bolts failed in the morning of October the 15th, 1970, and a vicious buckle snaked along the panels. At 11:50 on this day, 48 years ago, site controller Heinz Shaw asked his colleagues a question: should I get the bods off? The question should have been asked hours before, and the answer was yes, because almost immediately the bridge collapsed. Heinz Shaw's body was found amongst the rubble. More than 50 men came down with over 2,000 tonnes of steel and concrete and slammed into the waters of the Yarra River. 35 of those men would never return to work or to home or to see their families again. 35 men taken, 35 families broken. Young men like Ross Bigmore, who was to be married on Melbourne Cup Day the same year, and older men like Charles Lund, who was planning on moving to Queensland to be with his wife and 7 children and his own mum. And families like Mrs. Butters, whose husband Bernard was amongst the last confirmed killed when his body floated free from a tangled piece of sunken scaffolding 8 days later. But as in every tragedy that impacts us, it was working people who showed heroic values of mateship that make Australia the land of a fair go. From Bill Snowden, who dug out his mate and refused to leave his side, to 20-year-old John Doody, who carried out the dead and the wounded for hours until he collapsed from exhaustion. He was ordered to go home and rest, and he was back within an hour. And into the night and the long next day, the emergency service workers who toiled to free the dead and the living, aided by the workmates of the trapped and supported by the entire Victorian community. And would never be the same for those workers. Even those who survived, like John's dad and so many other dads, would have to live with the pain of this time, the loss of their mates and the horrors of the rescue scene. So today we gather to pay tribute to every single one of them and every single other worker here and around the world who was killed at work, but to the 35 who died and the dozens who survived. And we remember the workplace safety can never be taken for granted. And if the question is, should I get the bods off? The question is always yes. To act for the safety of workers and the safety of their families, because no one should have to wait at home afraid their loved ones will not come home. Every worker should make it home safe every time, every shift. There are some who paint workplace safety as a burden or as a union obsession that costs lives and delays projects. Well, safety should be everyone's obsession, because there isn't a project in this country or in any country that is worth the life of a worker. If it can't be done without killing a worker, without destroying a family, without ripping apart a community, then it can't be done. The Royal Commission into the Westgate Bridge collapse ultimately found that the margins of safety for the bridge were inadequate, and that the boss had failed in their duty to prevent the contractor from using procedures liable to be dangerous. And what's changed? We've seen the recent crane collapse at Box Hill. We saw the wall collapse at Lygon Street that killed people who were just walking down a public street. We see the regulators in this country fine unions for standing up for safety, for standing up for workers' lives. At the same time, companies like Grocon that are involved in the collapse of things like that wall in Lygon Street got fined $300,000. It's a disgrace. We know that some bosses cut corners to make money. We know if we let them, they will cut corners to make money. They roll the dice on safety, and it's workers' lives they're gambling with every day and every time. If you do not have strong unions to say no to this behaviour, it costs lives. That is why I stand with the CFMEU and every other building union. Because it's in the building construction unions, along with the transport unions, that face down injuries and deaths at work every single day. Workers join their union because they know that safety isn't about red tape or putting a burden on business. Safety in construction is about life and death. Safety is about going home at the end of the day. 48 years ago, 35 workers came to this site and never went home. We will never forget. Thank you.